Hey there, guys. Alright, today we are continuing the 8 days of Warhammer 40k lore and, well, Warhammer 40k videos. This is another Arbiter Ian video, and this one is the Primarchs. Where are they all now? Are they lazy? Who's a lazy piece of shit? And who's actually putting in the work? We already know Gilliman is going to be number 1, because he's putting in all the work. Vulcan would be number 1 if they could just find him. Anyways, before we dive in, make sure you go and check out the links in the description box below. I would love you to join the Discord. Follow me over at Twitch. Please do go check out the 2 gaming channels here on YouTube. One is for edited content, and then the other is for stream VODs. Got it? Good? Alright, let's dive in.
Hi gang, so the 20 Primarchs of Warhammer 40,000 straddle a line between...
Aren't 2 of them, like, gone, like, never gonna hear from again, don't even know their names?
being main characters and mythic figures. In the Horus heresy, they're tragic generals whose flaws lead to the greatest civil war mankind has ever known, and while some of them are...
No, I blame the Emperor for the Horus heresy. Emperor really could have avoided it all.
Are still trying to top that achievement in the 41st millennium, most aren't, having faded away into legend. So let's take a look at each one and ask, where are they now? How prominent the Primarchs have been in Warhammer 40k has waxed and waned over the years. Originally, they were designed as little more than backstory, mythic figures, barely more than a list of names that...
Odd that 2 and 11 were destroyed following the Horus heresy. But the others that fought betrayed the Emperor in the heresy don't have their records. That's weird.
Filled out the background of the world. In the first published stories that feature many of the Primarchs, they're just listed as generals or commanders of various chapters. Horus was a traitor general who led chapters of Space Marines against the Emperor.
Okay. Oh, so we are doing a deep dive into their, like the original, like, intent of them. Okay. So yeah, this is not at all accurate to what it is today then.
Russ was an Imperial Army commander, and Lyn Elgonson the commander of the Dark Angels. As the setting then grew in complexity in the 90s...
Oh, I hate that look for Horus. I don't like the look of Horus today, even, but like that one is bad.
And stories like the Horus heresy were fleshed out. They switched to being these super...
Is that like a fish? Looks like a... What is this? What the fuck?
...human primogenitors of the Space Marine legions, but they were still very much in the background, a way of illustrating that the Imperium was a shadow of its former self. It was only really with the Horus Heresy card game in the early 2000s, then a novel series, then a tabletop game, that they became main characters with fully realized personalities, which has, in some cases, made it really obvious how quickly that original list of names...
Okay, order or origination unknown. Got it. There we are.
Up. Fast forward to now, where we have a cast of realized characters with accounts of what they were like, where they went and what they did during the Great Crusade, and then the Horus Heresy, and then after that. Except some of those haven't quite been fully filled in yet. For some of the Primarchs, we have complete histories and even contemporary events, and for some, we're still relying on the old myths and legends. We don't really know what they're all up to.
I feel like for Jagatai Khan, he's kind of got to stay a myth. I think, based on the little that I know, what fits his character seems to be that, like, mythic status.
So let's go through each of them in turn and find out what happened. And we'll do it with the help of this. Definitely not a tier list, just so we can see how many are still around. So every account of the Primarch starts with the same guy, Lionel Johnson, the first Primarch, Lord of the Dark Angels, and we have a bit more information about him than most. Throughout the Horus heresy, the Lion had mostly been kept to the sidelines by the Ruin Storm, Horus's clever plan that kept the three largest loyalist legions trapped far from Terra, and while he spent the latter years of the heresy on a campaign of revenge, destroying the homeworlds of various traitor legions, he arrived too late to effect the final battle during the Siege of Terra. But his story really gets going just after the heresy, when he returned to his homeworld, Caliban. Caliban was a strange place, possessed of a world spirit that was part of an ancient triumvirate of warp devices and which affected the loyalties of certain of its inhabitants. Unlike many Legion worlds, it had been fully colonized by the Imperium, its forests torn down and great cities erected in its place, while its Primarch largely abandoned it. The Astartes stationed there had grown disillusioned with the Imperium as a whole, and specifically with their treatment by their estranged legion, and at some point during the heresy, they declared themselves independent. When the Lion returned to Caliban at the end of the heresy, war quickly broke out. The defense systems of Caliban opened fire on the Dark Angel's fleet, and in return, Johnson bombed the planet into oblivion, facing his former second-in-command, Luther, on one of the surviving fragments as the planet crumbled around them. Anyway, after all this, he disappeared. Luther was found incoherent and driven mad by what he'd done, but the Lion was nowhere to be seen. Over time, legends grew that he'd been taken away by the mysterious Watchers in the Dark and slept deep within that fragment of Caliban, now named the Rock, the mobile fortress monastery of the Dark Angels, and that he would awake in the Imperium's time of greatest need, which will become a theme in this video. But unlike many of the other Primarchs who get that story...
Okay, sort of King Arthur vibes for him then. A natural entity of the world, sort of reminiscent of, like, you know, the Lady of the Lake in a sense. I mean, his appearance as well, stereotypical perspective on King Arthur. He will return when humanity needs him, and he was like the first legion or whatever. He's kind of King Arthur coded. For sure.
He actually did. After an indeterminate time and asleep in the rock, Lionel Johnson mysteriously returned, guided by the Watchers in the Dark, through a sort of mirror Caliban, and emerging in Imperium Nihilus in the late 41st or early 42nd millennium. One of two loyalist Primarchs still active. So far, he seems to have mellowed, tracking down and in some cases forgiving the Dark Angels who had turned against him, and fighting during the Arcs of Omen campaign to save his descendants in the chapter. But as we'll find out, there are an awful lot more traitor Primarchs still around, so he's got his work cut out. The second Primarch is one of the Lost. Whoever they were, their legion fought in the Crusade, but at some point something happened. Their legion was, I guess, repurposed, and the rest of the Primarchs swore never to talk about it. There are a load of theories about this, but number 2 is one we're going to skip and move on. Number 3, though, has a lot more information. Fulgrim of the Emperor's Children sided with Horus during the heresy, and his legion were one of the first to fall. By midway through the heresy, Fulgrim had already been turned into a demon prince of Slanesh, helped along by a possessed blade taken from the corrupted civilization of the Xenos.
I wish that were me.
At the Siege of Terra, he fought Rogel Dawn and was banished back to the Warp, and immediately after the heresy, he was then attacked by loyalist Emperor's Children on the world of Istvan III, but he would become a thorn in the side of the Imperium for the millennia to come. At the Battle of Thessalia in 121 M31, so just after the heresy, he fought his brother, Robut Guilliman, slitting his throat with a poison blade that required the Primarch of the Ultramarines to be held in stasis for 10,000 years, which is a bit of a win. Since then, Fulgrim has dwelt within the Eye of Terror, or I guess now the Great Rift, working through mostly his agents. In fact, shortly after the return of Guilliman in the 41st millennium, Fulgrim's agents attempted to finish the job Fulgrim had started millennia before, attempting to assassinate him during his triumph at Macragge. Guilliman survived, but it was a reminder of how far Fulgrim's influence still spreads. But Fulgrim's an interesting one because he actually exists in 2 places. In the late 40th millennium, his former chief apothecary, Fabius Bile, actually succeeded in cloning the Primarch, creating a new, pure Fulgrim before his fall to chaos. The clone Fulgrim expressed regret for his namesake's actions, but when it became clear that the clone was as likely to fall as the original, Fabius Bile betrayed him, and the clone now resides in a stasis field as an exhibit in the Museum of the Necron Collector,
That's a bit fucked up, ain't it?
as in the Infinite. So we'll put him in the columns for active traitor Primarch, but we'll put a little mini Fulgrim in the lost one too, because we don't really know what's going to happen with him. Next up is Perabo of the Iron Warriors. Perabo was one of the more reluctant converts to the traitor cause, lured to the side of Horus after decades of being overlooked by the Emperor. He was placed in charge of the Siege of Terror, which he executed horrifically efficiently, bringing down Rogal Dawn's fortifications one line at a time. But as the traitor forces started to lose cohesion, and after numerous traitor commanders and primarchs just ignored his plans, he became a bit disillusioned. The siege, his big test against his old rival, Rogal Dawn of the Imperial Fists, was now tainted by the warp-infused monstrosities the rest of the traitors had become. And when he was ordered to disperse his troops and cede control to other traitor commanders, he quit the battle in a rage and pulled his forces back from the planet. In the wake of the heresy, Perabo continued his vendetta.
God, I hate his face. I hate the wires.
Against Dawn, humiliating the Imperial Fists on Sebastus IV during the Battle of the Eternal Fortress before the Iron Warriors, their point made as far as they were concerned, pulled back to the Eye of Terror. There, they made their new home on the fortress world of Medrengard, where Perabo rules as a demon prince of chaos undivided in his Fortress of Hate. From there, Perabo still exerts a measure of control over the old Iron Warriors Legion, dispatching warbands to aid his allies. In M32, he annihilated the Forge world of Toll with a demonic data plague, and warbands from the Iron Warriors accompanied Vashtor the Archiphane's Ark of Omen fleets. But largely, Pertabo's content to rule from within warp space. He was last sighted battling Mortarion for control of Disactus in the War of Rust and Ruin. He's going to go in the column
The War of Rust and Ruin. I like it.
For exists, but maybe doesn't do much right now. For the fifth Primarch, even less is known. Jagatai Khan was one of 3 loyalist Primarchs who defended Terra during the siege.
God, he looks so cool. I will say, I think out of aesthetics, Jagatai Khan might be my favorite looking.
Natural battlefield. During the final days, he gathered a force that sallied out from the palace, retaking the Lion's Gate spaceport from the forces of the Death Guard and ensuring that the imminent Imperial reinforcements would have a way of landing their troops. During that battle, he fought and eventually bested Mortarion, banishing him to the warp, but he was almost killed doing so. He was brought back to the palace barely alive and was only saved by the Emperor himself, redirecting a fragment of his power. Recovering after the events of the heresy, the Khan was instrumental in hunting down the remnants of the traitor legions during the Scouring, as the Imperium forced Horus's traitors back into the Eye of Terror. But during the Battle of Korasil 5 in the Yasan sector, during a fight against both traitor forces and the Drakari Eldar, the Khan was lost. Last seen pursuing the Xenos into the depths of the webway, and he hasn't been seen again for 10,000 years. So we'll put him in the lost column. Liman Russ of the Space Wolves has a similar story. He spent a fair part of the heresy on Terra, but rather than wait for the
God, I wish I had that hairline. Liman Russ, give it to me.
Siege, he and his forces sallied out in an attempt to kill Horus. Though the 2 Primarchs fought, and Horus was apparently seriously wounded, Russ was knocked into a coma, and his legion were harried onto the retreat, chased by the traitors until they were no longer a threat for the rest of the heresy. Russ missed the final battle, but returned to lead the Space Wolves through the Scouring that followed. Like Jagatai Khan, Russ's location in the 41st millennium is unknown. At a feast in 211 M31, he declared that he would return for the final battle, for the Wolf Time, and with that, his personal retinue set
Very much Ragnarok coded.
off into the Eye of Terror on an unknown mission. The Space Wolves haven't seen him since, though they occasionally call a great hunt to try and find their lost Primarch and tell tales of his quest to find the mythical Tree of Life that could restore the Emperor to health, but no one really knows what the truth is. We'll put him in the lost column. Unlike Russ, Rogel Dawn was present for everything. After leading the defense of the solar system during the Heresy, Dawn took part in the Anabasis assault on Horus's flagship, the Vengeful Spirit, along with the Emperor and Sanguinius, but his teleportation was intercepted and he ended up far away on the other side of the ship and unable to intervene in the final battle between Horus and the Emperor. It was Dawn who found the Emperor's body and bore him back to Terra, installing him in the Golden Throne. After the Heresy and after his defeat at the hands of Perabo during the Eternal Fortress, which it should be said the Imperial Fists record as a victory for themselves, Dawn fought through the Scouring, eventually splitting his legion down into successor chapters, though he resisted for a very long time. He was one of the last loyal Primarchs known to be active, but eventually he was lost during a raid on a Chaos fleet, attacking with a much smaller force. Only his hand was recovered from the Chaos battleship the Sword of Sacrilege. Dawn is officially assumed by the Imperium to be dead, though his body was never found, and at least one other Primarch, Vulcan of the Salamanders, had mentioned him as being alive since then, so I guess we'll put him somewhere in between dead and lost. He's probably one of the
Vulcan
less likely ones to
Ra.
make another appearance. Okay, we're at 8. The 8th Primarch story was cut short way sooner than the last few. Conrad Kur and his Night Lords were almost a rebel legion before the Heresy, and they sided with the traitors, mostly through a desire for revenge. Kur was sent by Horus to harry the Dark Angels on the far side of the Ruinstorm, and while he was pretty successful at that, he was eventually captured by the Lion, Sanguinius, and Guilliman. After the Heresy, the Night Lords were pretty comprehensively scattered, though their Primarch was still at large. Eventually, he was tracked down by a lone Calidus assassin named Mshen, back on Sagwalsa on the Eastern Fringe. Kurz had long suffered from visions of the future, including his own death, and it's said that he was repentant till the end, seeing his assassination as final proof that he was only ever doing what he'd been created to do, and that the Emperor was just a hypocrite to censure him for it. Either way, he is the first person going into the dead column. Sanguinius, famously, is another Primarch who experienced visions, again including his own death. The Primarch of the Blood Angels was one of 3 that fought during the Siege of Terra, and, like Rogel Dawn, was part of that final assault on Horus's flagship, but he came upon Horus first and was killed. His legacy is mixed. His death brought to the fore the black rage felt by the Astartes of his gene seed even into the 41st millennium, but his story ends there. He's the second of our definitely 100% dead Primarchs, but he's not the last, because Ferris Manus of the Iron Hands is the next one. Ferris was one of the greatest commanders of the Great Crusade, found early on and used to commanding a major part of the Imperium's war machine, but he's another loyalist Primarch with no post-heresy story, because he was also the first one to die. When Horus's treachery was revealed, Ferris Manus was put in command of the Retribution fleet, deployed to the Istvan system to put down the rebellion, but rather than wait for reinforcements, he deployed immediately to the surface of Istvan 5 with relatively little support, and during the battle, he was killed by his closest friend, Fulgrim of the Emperor's Children. He dead. Dead column for him. Right, number 11 is another one of those pesky missing Primarchs. Like the second Primarch, nothing is known, they were lost during the Crusade, and everyone sworn to secrecy, so we have to move on. The 12th Primarch is Angron of the World Eaters. Angron was slowly dying through the Great Crusade as the Butcher's nails implanted by his captors during his childhood on Nuceria slowly ate away at his brain. During the Heresy, in an attempt to save him, his brother Lorgar dedicated Angron and his legion to the Chaos power Khorne, turning Angron into a demon prince. It was in this form that he fought on Terra.
Honestly, his demon prince form, so much cooler than his human form. His human form, fucking lame. That demon form, though, kind of sick.
finally being banished by Sanguinius, but since then he's been one of the more active Primarchs, returning to plague the Imperium again and again. In the 38th millennium, he led a 2-century crusade across the galaxy known as the Domain of Fire, spreading war and rebellion over 70 sectors, and in the early 41st millennium, he returned at the head of a colossal demon army to invade the planet of Armageddon. The first war for Armageddon was only ended by a mass deployment of the Grey Knights led by brother Captain Aurelian. Angron has been active again since the Great Rift opened, leading his ancient flagship, the Conqueror, in raids on Imperial space, as well as acting during the Arcs of Omen campaign, first to destroy the Choral engine on Malakbile, and later dueling his returned brother Lionel Johnson on Wormwood. Angron becomes the second active traitor Primarch on the list. Okay, the 13th Primarch, Robert Guilliman, is of course one of the most active ones. After the Horus Heresy, the Ultramarines were by far the strongest legion. Their isolation behind the Ruin Storm and their incredible logistical network meant that they were pretty much at full strength, and Guilliman quickly took to the task of holding the Imperium together, instituting the Codex Astartes, seeing the breaking down of the legions into chapters, and leading the scouring that forced the traitors back into the Eye of Terror. That was until early M31, when, as we've heard, he had his throat slit by the poisoned blade of Fulgrim, and his legion, unable to stop the poison from spreading, preserved him in a stasis field. He remained there, locked minutes from death, for 10,000 years, until the Mechanicum Archmagos Belisarius Cawl, aided by the Saint Celestine and the Eldar Inari, resurrected him in the wake of the fall of Cadia in M41, as the Great Rift spread across the galaxy. Travelling to Terra, Guilliman quickly took on the role of Lord Commander of the Imperium and launched the Indomitus Crusade, seeking to hold together the Imperium as the Rift spread and the Imperium Nihilus was separated from the Imperium Sanctus. As of the current time, he's one of only 2 returned Loyalist Primarchs, and currently the overall commander of the armies of the Imperium. And Mortarion of the Death Guard is another pretty active Primarch. During the journey to Terra, shortly before the siege, Mortarion finally succumbed to Nurgle and took on the mantle of Demon Prince, and it was in this form he fought during the siege. He was an instrumental frontline commander for the traitors, but as the attack ground on, he eventually took up residence in the Lion's Gate spaceport, where he was later banished to the warp by Jagate Khan of the White Scars. After the heresy, Mortarion remained a constant threat. He took up residence on a planet in the Eye of Terror, renamed the Plague Planet, unsurprisingly, and led raids into real space. In 901 M41, he slew...
Man, I wonder which traitor, which warp god, chaos god he serves. Surely not Papa Nurgle. Not at all.
The Supreme Grand Master of the Grey Knights during the Battle of Korovin, although that did lead to him being hunted down by the next one, Kaldor Drago, and banished for a few more hundred years. But then, since the emergence of the Great Rift, he's been cited numerous times at the head of legions of demons, most notably during the Plague Wars, as his forces attempted to invade and destroy the realm of Ultramar. Mortarion becomes the third of our definitely 100% active traitor Primarchs. We're well into the Demon Primarchs here. The 15th Primarch is Magnus the Red. Magnus was censured by the Emperor early in the heresy for his continued use of psychic powers and eventually almost killed by Liman Russ of the Space Wolves. Magnus was fractured into shards and eventually, as his sons regathered them, was reborn as a demon prince of Tzeentch. During the Siege of Terra, he worked to remove the Emperor's psychic barriers around the palace, but after Horus's defeat, his legion retreated back to the Eye of Terror, taking up residence on Sortiarius, the planet of the sorcerers. For a while, he dwelt in self-imposed exile, especially after his chief librarian, Ahriman, enacted his rubric, turning almost all the legion into automatons, living suits of armor filled with nothing but dust. But Magnus was determined to have his revenge against the Space Wolves. In M32, he led the Thousand Sons in an attempt to take the Space Wolves' homeworld of Fenris, but the first battle of the Fang ended up in defeat. Later in.
1st Battle of the Fang. I like.
In 41, he tried again, this time fermenting a cult of Tzeentch on Fenris that saw a second Battle of the Fang, and eventually generated enough arcane power for him to pull the planet of the sorcerers into real space, into the same system as his old homeworld of Prospero, opening a permanent warp rift that allowed him to remain in real space. During the spread of the Cicatrix Maledictum, his forces engaged Guilliman multiple times, first ambushing his fleet in the warp, then chasing the survivors through the webway, and finally leading a massive attack onto the surface of Luna as Guilliman attempted to return to Terra. Following the Great Rift, he tried to take advantage of the psychic bleed into the galaxy, conjuring a huge spell to summon psychers from all over the Imperium, but he was again eventually stopped by the Grey Knights. Magnus is another of our active, definitely existing traitor Primarchs. The roll stops there for the traitors though. 16 is a really quick one, because it's Horus, and we all know what happened to him. Horus led the Horus heresy and was killed by the Emperor at the end of it. There were a few aborted attempts to clone him, but none of them really worked out, especially when the last of the research was destroyed by Abaddon soon after the heresy. Horus is, of course, dead. Lorgar is the Primarch of the Wordbearers, our 17th, and he was the cause of the whole heresy to start with, falling into chaos way before any of the others and working to corrupt Horus himself. However, when Horus was wounded by Liman Russ on the approach to Terra, Lorgar attempted a coup to take command of the traitor forces. But when he was betrayed and Horus recovered, Lorgar was exiled and never took part in the siege. Since then, he's mostly confined himself to meditation at the Templum Inficio on the demon world of Sicarius, eventually attaining the status of Demon Prince of Chaos Undivided. At various points, he's broken this exile to aid his own legion, who remain one of the better organized Chaos forces, including fighting his brother Korax, who seems dedicated to hunting him down, and by the 41st millennium, there are rumors that he's returned in the wake of the Great Rift to spread his creed at the head of a massive word-bearers fleet. There's no actual evidence of that, though. So he's going to go alongside Perabo as people we know who are active, but don't seem to be actually doing very much. Vulcan of the Salamanders is another
number one
strange one like that. At the end of the heresy, he was stationed inside the Emperor's throne room, the final guardian, keeping shut the webway gate beneath the palace and fighting Magnus the Red to defend it. Like many of the loyalist Primarchs, Vulcan embarked on a quest of his own after the heresy, declaring to his salamanders that he would return for the end times. Where have we heard that before? And 1500 years later, he did, during the War of the Beast, where he temporarily took control of the Imperium and fought against the Orcs for the duration of the campaign, eventually destroying himself and the Beast in the final battle at Ullanor. The Imperium officially considers him to be dead, but he always made it clear that the War of the Beast wasn't the actual end time he was talking about, and the Salamanders believe he'll return when all 9 of the artifacts of Vulcan have been found. So, yeah, another wandering one. Korax is then similar. During the heresy, his legion were almost wiped out, and he turned to prescribed technology to try and solve this, which didn't turn out very well. After the heresy, he briefly participated in the scouring and the breaking of his legion into independent chapters, but he was racked with guilt over his failed attempts to hothouse Astartes. Eventually, he executed his mutated creations and locked himself away in the Raven Spire on Deliverance. A year to the day later, he emerged and left the Fortress Monastery on a direct route into the Eye of Terror, apparently on a mission to hunt down the remaining traitor Primarchs. His last words to his chapter were, "Nevermore." Since then, Korax has only briefly been seen, mostly hunting the Word-Bearers and their Primarch Lorgar, his time in the Warp enhancing his previous abilities and turning him into a warp-fueled horror of living shadows, which I guess means he's active but not helping much, or maybe lost. Let's put him here for now. And then finally, we have the twin Primarchs Alfarius and Amigon of the Alpha Legion. One of them, most likely Alfarius, was killed by Rogaldorn at the start of the Solar War, the first of the traitor Primarchs to die, so that's an easy one. But his twin was a bit more difficult. The Alpha Legion didn't immediately flee to the Eye of Terror and continued their campaign for a long while after the heresy, eventually moving more and more towards the Galactic East towards the Ultramarines in Ultramar. On Escrador, the remaining Alpha Legion Primarch fought Robert Guilliman and was killed by him. So that should be both of them in the dead column, but since then, numerous raids and wars have been attributed to Alfarius, including raids on the Dinera subsector, where the 6 Vindicar assassins sent to kill the apparent Primarch were found beheaded soon after. Of course, it's the Alpha Legion, so any of this might be a lie. Let's put the second Alpha Legion Primarch somewhere between dead and lost, because I guess anything could be true. And that's our list complete. At the time of writing, the Loyalists have only 2 existing Primarchs, but potentially another 5 hiding out somewhere in the galaxy, if only someone could find them and bring them back, and then 2 definitely confirmed as dead. On the other hand, the traitors have 4 extremely active Demon Primarchs, 2 more definitely still around but not really doing much, 3 dead, and 1 uncertain. So there we go. That's every...
Well, and also it depends on whether or not Alfarian, whatever, is like legitimately a chaos server, or if he's a spy.
One accounted for. We don't yet know if this is gonna change. Returning some of them to life in the 41st millennium seems to be quite a popular move, so maybe that will happen more. Anyway, thanks for watching.
And that was the Primarchs, where they all are now. Warhammer 40k lore by Arbiter Ian. This was a great video. I do like his style. Don't really have anything else to add here at the end. I hope you guys enjoyed as well. Remember to hit that like button and subscribe for more. And I will see you guys in the next video. Peace.